Hi besties, welcome back to Coravanta, and today we're diving into one of the wildest legal document dumps we've seen so far in this saga, because the latest set of court filings has done something fascinating. It's taken us right back to the heart of earlier discussions, rumors and accusations that many people glossed over at the time, and now with the benefit of hindsight and receipts, we can connect dots in a way that exposes just how much manipulation, cherry-picking and flat-out timeline distortion has been going on behind the scenes in Blake Lively's amended complaint against Justin Baldoni, Wayfair, and by extension, anyone caught in the PR crossfire, including her own husband Ryan Reynolds. One of the most striking revelations tucked into these new filings is how Blake and her legal team tried to twist a set of text messages into a narrative that would smear Baldoni as someone deliberately plotting to damage Ryan Reynolds' reputation, when in reality, the context shows something far more mundane and nowhere near as malicious as they want the public, the court, and the press to believe. In the amended complaint, Blake's attorneys claim that Baldoni and his associates were having a conversation about flipping the narrative on a rumor regarding Ryan Reynolds supposedly calling the script of their film a disaster. The way the amended complaint phrases this makes it sound as if Baldoni, his partner Steve Sarowitz, and their media strategist Melissa Nathan were huddling together to invent a smear campaign against Reynolds, with the alleged goal of portraying him as an anti-feminist who undermined a female screenwriter hired to work on the movie. That's the dramatic version Blake's lawyers want everyone to latch onto. But when you actually trace the source of the rumor and then examine the full uncropped text messages that have now come to light through discovery, a very different story emerges. Here's where the contradictions begin. The rumor about Ryan Reynolds allegedly calling the script a disaster didn't originate with Baldoni or his camp at all. It actually came from a Daily Mail article written by journalist James Beeka, who has long been linked to Blake and Ryan's own publicist, Leslie Sloan. Multiple sources have confirmed that Sloan was feeding information directly to Beeka around that time, something she has never denied and something that becomes glaringly obvious when you track the handful of articles Beeka published in August of that year, nearly all of which contained spin or framing favorable to Blake's narrative. So, when the amended complaint references Baldoni supposedly scheming to weaponize Reynolds' words, the foundational problem is that Reynolds never said those words in the first place. There is no record, no quote, no recording of Ryan Reynolds calling the script a disaster, just a tabloid article whose origin points straight back to his own wife's PR machine. This already pokes a massive hole in Blake's legal strategy, because her team is trying to hold Baldoni accountable for something her side seeded into the media ecosystem. But it doesn't stop there. In their attempt to make Baldoni look like he was salivating at the chance to brand Ryan as an anti-feminist, Blake's team took a few cherry-picked messages completely out of context. The specific exchange in question involves Baldoni texting Melissa Nathan and another associate about how his business partner Steve Sarowitz suggested flipping the narrative from the script disaster rumor to something about Ryan undermining a feminist writer. If you read just that one snippet, it sounds damning. But if you look at the surrounding texts, which Blake's team conveniently left out, you see that Baldoni was not plotting a smear campaign. He was relaying a suggestion from Sarowitz. Nathan immediately pushed back by saying the narrative was already working in their favor without doing anything, and Baldoni himself added that it would be an easy flip, if needed, but then pivoted straight into discussing a legitimate variety story being prepared by respected film journalist Tatiana Siegel. That variety piece, crucially, had nothing to do with the script disaster rumor or attacking a female writer. Instead, it was about allegations that Reynolds was scabbing during the writer's strike, basically writing or rewriting material in violation of union rules. The complaint conveniently ignores that part of the conversation, because including it would show that the actual focus was on labor ethics and strike breaking, not on gendered smear tactics. Even more troubling for Blake's credibility is how her team manipulated the timeline of these events. In her amended complaint, she claims that on August 15, Reynolds' team was already shutting down inquiries and staying silent, supposedly to distance themselves from these controversies. But the only text message she provides to back that up is from August 29, 2 full weeks later. In that August 29 message, Reynolds' rep explicitly tells him and Blake that it's imperative we stay silent on everything and speak to nobody, reinforcing the idea that the family was taking the high road. Yet just 2 weeks before, on August 15, Leslie Sloan was demonstrably still engaging with the press, planting stories with James Beeka at the Daily Mail, including one about Reynolds swooping in to save the script. In other words, Blake's team is presenting a text from late August as though it reflects the stance they had in mid-August, when in fact the opposite is true. Leslie Sloan was fueling the media fire during that earlier period, not extinguishing it. This is what makes the complaint's framing so misleading. It relies on selective presentation of evidence, deliberately conflating dates and contexts, to paint a narrative where Reynolds was an innocent victim of Baldoni's scheming when in reality, Reynolds' own publicist was contributing to the very rumors Baldoni was accused of amplifying. Adding another layer, the complaint tries to bolster the narrative by pointing to Steve Sarowitz wearing a t-shirt at a Wayfair Foundation event that read, "Seek always to do what is right and noble," implying that his private suggestion to flip the narrative made him a hypocrite. But this too is a gross misrepresentation. The text showed that Sarowitz threw out an idea in passing. Nathan responded that things were already going in their favor without needing to flip anything, and Baldoni never acted on the suggestion. There was no campaign, no smear article, no coordinated effort to paint Reynolds as anti-feminist. The only published articles around that time were Sloan-fed Daily Mail pieces and a Variety article about strike issues that was being pursued regardless of anything Baldoni said. In fact, the Variety piece wasn't even particularly damaging. It focused more on speculation about whether a sequel to the film would happen and mentioned Reynolds' rooftop scene writing in the context of strike chatter, something Blake herself publicly discussed on a red carpet. If anything, Blake was the one feeding ammunition into the press cycle, not Baldoni. All of this suggests one of two possibilities. Either Blake and her team were given incomplete, cherry-picked data by their ally Stephanie Jones, who may have filtered or reorganized the message threads to suit a particular narrative, or Blake's team had access to the full threads but deliberately culled only the fragments they could twist to support their claims. Both possibilities are damning. If they were misled by Jones, it shows incompetence and over-reliance on biased sources. If they knowingly cherry-picked, it shows intentional deception. Either way, the discovery process is now laying bare the discrepancies, exposing how much of the amended complaint rests on shaky ground. Consider the broader pattern too. Last week Blake's team was caught misusing statements from Bellin, trying to claim he admitted to using bots when in fact the full context shows he was talking about boosting posts in a completely different legitimate context. Wayfair's documentation has proven that those bot allegations were false. Now we're seeing the same playbook applied to text messages. Pull a phrase, strip it of context, insert it into a misleading timeline and present it as evidence of a conspiracy. The irony is staggering. For months, Blake and her supporters have framed Baldoni as the manipulator, the puppet master, the one orchestrating PR schemes behind the scenes. But every new set of documents makes it clearer that Blake's own camp, especially through Sloan and Jones, were the ones running information ops, planting stories, manipulating timelines, and then projecting that behavior onto Baldoni. Even the notion that Reynolds needed to be protected from being painted as anti-feminist collapses under scrutiny, because nobody outside of Blake's amended complaint ever made that claim. It existed only as a hypothetical suggestion in one private text exchange that never materialized into any real-world story. The only real-world articles at the time came from Sloan's leaks and from Variety's independent strike coverage. By conflating those threads, Blake's legal team has created a Frankenstein narrative stitched together from out-of-context quotes, date manipulation and baseless insinuations. What's most astonishing is how brazen this strategy is. Legal filings are supposed to be precise, fact-checked and backed by evidence, yet Blake's amended complaint reads more like a PR press release designed to sway public opinion than a serious legal document. By introducing extraneous details like Sarowitz's t-shirt slogan, they're appealing to emotion and optics rather than substance. By referencing August 15 while citing an August 29 text, they're hoping nobody notices the chronological sleight of hand. By framing Baldoni's easy flip comment as though it were a concrete plan of attack, they're banking on the court not having access to the full text thread, which unfortunately for them discovery has now provided. And the more these discrepancies pile up, the more it looks like Blake's team has been building their case on a foundation of sand. Think about the cumulative effect. Blake accused Baldoni of using bots, debunked. She accused him of scheming to smear Reynolds, debunked. She claimed Reynolds' team was silent while Baldoni attacked, debunked. Each time the actual evidence shows the opposite. It was Blake's team seeding stories, manipulating context, and trying to weaponize the media. This not only undermines her credibility in court but also risks severe reputational damage outside of it. Because if the press and the public start to realize that she's been fabricating narratives in her legal filings, the backlash could be brutal. It transforms her from sympathetic victim into manipulative aggressor, the very role she's been trying to pin on Baldoni. And perhaps the biggest irony of all? The Variety article that Blake's team was so eager to distance from Baldoni's texts ended up being more about potential sequels and labor disputes than about Reynolds or the female screenwriter. It didn't damage Reynolds' reputation. It didn't portray him as anti-feminist. It didn't validate Sarwitz's suggestion. If anything, it showed how irrelevant the easy flip idea was because no one pursued it. Yet Blake's complaint treats that idea as though it were a fully executed PR campaign. That's the kind of exaggeration that not only weakens her legal arguments but also makes her look desperate. The court isn't going to be swayed by dramatic narratives when the receipts tell a different story. And the receipts here are crystal clear. Blake's team misrepresented the timeline, omitted key context, and falsely attributed motives to Baldoni that he never acted upon. In the end, what we're left with is a pattern that's impossible to ignore. Every time Blake's case seems to hinge on a dramatic allegation, discovery reveals that the truth is far more mundane and far less favorable to her side. Her amended complaint is riddled with distortions, and as more of these distortions come to light, her credibility takes hit after hit. It's a dangerous game to play, because once a court loses trust in your honesty, every other claim you make is viewed through a skeptical lens. And if this continues, Blake risks not only losing the case but also permanently damaging her reputation as someone who tried to manipulate both the legal system and public opinion with half-truths and outright fabrications. The truth behind the ongoing drama involving Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, Ryan Reynolds, Brian Friedman, and the WGA strike is far more complicated than the surface-level narrative that Hollywood PR machines are trying to push. And if we peel back the layers of how this entire mess unfolded, what we find is not just a simple disagreement over professional boundaries but a calculated effort to manipulate public perception, distract audiences from legal realities and confuse even those closely following the case, because at the center of it all lies one crucial point. The lawsuit filed by Lively and the stories promoted by her team are full of contradictions, half-truths, and deliberate omissions designed to protect her image while simultaneously damaging Baldoni's reputation. And when you look at the way evidence was presented, or rather misrepresented, it becomes clear that this is not just a clash of personalities but a case study in how Hollywood elites exploit strikes, guild protections, and media channels to cover their tracks. Now let's go back to the timeline, because the way this narrative was pieced together makes little sense if you take it at face value. During the WGA strike, strict rules prohibited writers, editors, and associated creatives from engaging in covered work. And yet evidence surfaced showing that Lively was directly involved in editing materials tied to the project, which by definition meant she was doing strike-prohibited work. But instead of addressing this contradiction, her team spun the story into a tale of innocent boosting, where she supposedly just supported Baldoni's project without crossing professional lines. However, testimony, leaked messages, and insider accounts all point to the opposite, revealing that she wasn't just a casual supporter but an active participant. And here's where the lawsuit gets shaky. If her claim was that Baldoni manipulated her into crossing boundaries, then why were there multiple documented instances where she independently edited footage, offered narrative notes, and positioned herself as more than just an actress? Actions that undermined the very foundation of her lawsuit. And this is exactly what Friedman, Baldoni's attorney, capitalized on, because he knew the jury needed only one major contradiction to doubt the entire story. And that contradiction was crystal clear in the timeline, because if Lively was truly coerced, she wouldn't have volunteered edits or defended her role. Until she was later caught, and instead of admitting the mistake, her team reframed it as a misunderstanding, banking on the fact that the general public wouldn't understand the nuances of guild rules or strike protocols. Let's not forget the so-called boosting defense, which Lively's PR handlers repeated in interview-friendly outlets, as if casually boosting a colleague's work was the same as editing raw footage or shaping story arcs. And this strategy worked for a while, fooling casual fans and even some industry outsiders, but in court the distinction was fatal because guild rules are black and white. Boosting is posting a supportive comment, not adjusting cuts in a video file, not suggesting alternate narrative sequences, and certainly not inserting yourself into strike-protected work. And once this line was crossed, the legal argument shifted from a case of manipulation to a case of personal responsibility. But Hollywood, especially for stars like Lively, thrives on carefully curated victimhood, where accountability is deflected and the public is asked to sympathize with the celebrity instead of questioning their actions. And that's why every time footage discrepancies were discussed in court, Lively visibly tensed, her confident facade cracking just enough to show the weight of contradiction pressing on her, particularly when Baldoni's team directly pointed out her editing involvement, which demolished the innocent bystander persona her lawsuit depended on. But let's go deeper, because this case is not just about Blake versus Justin, it's also about how Hollywood legal battles are fought in the court of public opinion as much as in the courtroom itself. And if you analyze the media coverage, you'll notice that almost every outlet framing Lively as the betrayed party used similar language, often pushing the idea that Baldoni was the manipulator while Lively was the exploited friend, yet none of these pieces dealt with the technicalities of the strike. None asked why an actress of her experience would accidentally violate such obvious rules, and none acknowledged the hypocrisy of her editing work being reframed as supportive boosting, which shows us that this wasn't just bad journalism but a coordinated PR effort, likely orchestrated by her team in collaboration with sympathetic journalists to distract from the cracks in her story. But what about Ryan Reynolds, you might ask, because his role in this is less direct but still relevant. Reynolds, known for his witty, self-deprecating public persona, conveniently distanced himself from the legal drama, portraying himself as the supportive husband caught in the storm, yet multiple sources indicated he was fully aware of the editing sessions and even joked about Lively's involvement in them before the lawsuit escalated. And that detail matters, because it shows the Reynolds-Lively household wasn't blindsided but complicit in the actions that later became the core of her accusations against Baldoni. And here's where it gets really messy. The lawsuit not only presented Lively as a victim but also tried to paint Baldoni as reckless, manipulative and unprofessional, yet the court's review of evidence showed otherwise. And that's why Baldoni walked free while Lively's claims collapsed under scrutiny, because when the evidence doesn't match the narrative falls apart. And Friedman made sure the jury saw every contradiction, every blurred timeline, every piece of testimony that revealed the lawsuit was less about justice and more about saving face. And yet, despite the court's decision, the PR machine didn't stop. In fact, after the verdict, Lively's camp doubled down on spinning alternative explanations, suggesting the court didn't fully understand the nuances of manipulation, implying that legal technicalities favored Baldoni, and essentially asking the public to trust their version of the story over the legal record. Which brings us to the larger issue. The weaponization of victimhood in Hollywood, where stars caught breaking rules reinvent themselves as martyrs of circumstance, relying on their fame to shield them from accountability. And when you tie this back to the WJ strike, it's even more insulting, because thousands of less famous writers and editors lost income, stood on picket lines and respected the rules, while Lively quietly edited and crossed boundaries, only to later cry foul and sue when things didn't go her way. And in doing so she undermined the very solidarity that strikes depend on, yet expected to be applauded for her courage in standing up to Baldoni, when in reality she was standing up to her own mistakes. The more you analyze this case, the clearer it becomes that the lawsuit was never truly about misconduct. It was about image management, about creating a legal smokescreen to distract from guild violations, about rewriting the timeline so the blame shifted away from her and onto Baldoni. And if you trace every step, the editing, the boosting defense, the courtroom demeanor, the media spin, it all forms a pattern of misdirection, not unlike what we've seen in other Hollywood scandals, where the goal is not truth but narrative control. And the tragedy is that many fans, unaware of the details, still believe the victim narrative because it's easier to sympathize with a familiar face than to confront the uncomfortable reality that she knowingly broke the rules, lied about it, and then tried to sue her way out of accountability, which is why the phrase, massive misrepresentation, doesn't even begin to capture the scale of this deception, because what Lively and her team did wasn't just misleading, it was a calculated assault on truth, trust, and the very institutions that protect creative workers, and the fallout of this will linger for years, not just for Lively and Baldoni but for Hollywood as a whole, because every time a celebrity weaponizes victimhood to cover their tracks, it erodes public trust in real victims, real lawsuits and real causes, leaving us all to wonder. When the next big scandal breaks, will we believe it or will we assume it's just another polished lie dressed up as truth? Thanks for watching. Subscribe my channel Coravanta.